Volunteerism Task Force. Joining me today are Steve McKinley of Purdue University and Patricia McLaughlin of the University of Illinois Extension. And we are all members of the Volunteerism Task Force. Our other members that are part of our task force are listed here today as well. And we are always welcoming new members to join our task force. So if you would like additional information about our task force following today's webinar, feel free to follow up with any of us. We'd be happy to talk to you about our task force, and you are certainly welcome to join one of our meetings. Today we are going to talk some about the Isoture Volunteer Management Model. And so I'm going to turn it over to Pat.
Thank you, Jennifer. And the Isoture model is a 7-step model that a volunteer manager can use to help volunteers become more involved and effective. It was originally developed by Robert Dolan at North Carolina State University, and then was later introduced by Milton Boyce, who was at that time the national program leader, and he introduced it as a strategy for supporting 4-H volunteers. So we're going to take just a little time to go introduce each of the steps. The first is identification, which has 3 main components. The first is, that we need to think about are what are the volunteer roles we need to fill, what characteristics or skills are needed in those volunteer roles, and where are we going to find volunteers who have those skills, and who then will also best align with the identified roles that we're trying to fill. So our first task when we're looking at that is to either create or find role descriptions that clearly outline the responsibilities associated with each of those volunteer role positions. It's really critical that the volunteer role descriptions include clear expectations. When a volunteer offers to support the 4-H program, they want to do a good job, and that begins with us as staff making sure that they know what is expected of them. And remember, we always want to make sure that when we prepare role descriptions, that is what they are. They're role descriptions, not job descriptions. If you provide them with a job description, sometimes you're likely to get a response back from a volunteer saying, I have a job, I'm just looking to volunteer now. And it also can imply, if it's a job description, that there might be some additional payment or benefits that go along with it. This is a list that identifies what we feel are the most important parts of information that should be included in every volunteer role description. The role description is what they're agreeing to do. So it's really important that we make sure that it's clear and you aren't later surprising a volunteer with additional responsibilities that they had not agreed to. Which brings us to the last item you'll see on that list is signatures. The signature element is really important because that allows both the volunteer and the staff member who's working with that volunteer to sign off. This really indicates that, this is what we have both agreed to, so there aren't any of those surprises that come later. So the S in Isoture represents selection. And some of the key components involved in selection include how do we recruit volunteers? What do we need to consider of local demographics? Think about the process that's going to be used to complete the overall selection of the volunteers. Identifying expected volunteer behavior, making sure that we share that, and also having a plan for handling any challenges that may emerge along the way. So when we look at recruitment methods, one of the things that's really critical is to have a recruitment plan. Perhaps you're targeting a specific type of volunteer. For example, someone to support a specific content or subject matter area. Or perhaps it's a volunteer in a specific geographical location and is currently not being served in your community. So think about that so that you go in with that in mind so that you get the right volunteer in that position. You also need to make the media, and especially in today's world, the social media your friend. That's where people are every day. They're looking at social media, they're online. So if we're looking for volunteers, what better way to get the information in front of a lot of different people? It's also important to think about engaging existing volunteers. If you have a volunteer that is very passionate about the role they're playing, would feel very committed, what better person to go out and energize and talk to others about also being volunteers. So think about including current volunteers in your recruitment plan. And it's not often that people walk in off the street just asking for a volunteer. It does happen sometimes. But it's also really important to get out of your office and talk to people. Volunteer recruitment is an interactive experience, and so we need to make sure that we keep that in mind when we're working at recruiting volunteers. It's also important, and we talked a little bit about your existing pool of volunteers, but also look at it from the perspective of where do we have gaps. You know, are we missing volunteers that really are needed in our area? So one of the ways to do that is look at the county or community demographics. Your volunteer base really should mirror the same demographics that are in your county or community. That helps so volunteers connect with the audience. They're in the locations where you need them. They have the ability to create a welcoming and positive environment. So be sure that you're thinking about who or what area is being underrepresented when you're thinking about your volunteer recruitment plan. We also want to talk about screening. Screening, the safety of youth is paramount. Every state has a screening process, and you need to know what the protocol is in your state and never deviate from it. Those policies have been put in place for a reason, and anytime you don't follow the protocol, don't follow the policies, that leaves you very open to problems, to liability issues, and it also opens up this and leaves some holes that could be critical when it comes to the safety of our children. So be sure to impress upon your volunteers during orientation and screening that part of their role is also to create a safe and welcoming environment for youth and their families. And volunteer screening is something that is completed by all volunteers. And I think in today's world, I don't think typically we do not get much resistance for it just because we need to know that the youth in our program are safe.
Orientation is really the next step after we have screened those volunteers, and it provides the basic information that volunteers need to be successful, and it reviews the expectations of a position and highlights the differences in roles as a volunteer compared to what a participant was. So it makes that, makes clear what the difference is. And it should be completed as soon as possible after acceptance into the program. Training, on the other hand, provides volunteers with the information that they will need to be successful in carrying out their roles. And many times we utilize a variety of methods for doing this. We may incorporate technology, and it needs to meet individual needs and learning styles in order to be successful.
Next up, we want to talk about utilization. After we've actually found the volunteers, we've got them screened, and we've got them trained and oriented, we want to be sure that we utilize those volunteers in an effective manner so that they can actually do the role that we've asked them to fulfill. And so we want to find ways that we can incorporate those volunteers' talents and the skills that they bring to the table and provide them with the support that they need as they need that support. There's a number of different ways that we can utilize the volunteers and provide them that support. And as we look at the next slide, we'll show some of the very basics of those information, but it's really important as staff members or other volunteers working with new volunteers that we do follow up with them. We want to make sure that they understand that they do have that support. We want to visit them while they're in action, either leading a 4-H club, maybe putting on a project workshop, something along those lines, and be sure that they as a new volunteer understand that you have an open communication policy. may be a phone call, it may be email, it may be handwritten notes. These days we could add in their texting and social media. Whatever that communication method is that works best for the new volunteer, want to be sure that they know that they can contact us and work with us if they have questions or concerns that may be raised. And sometimes it's good to also provide some established volunteers, those individuals who have worked in the program for quite a while, to serve as mentors for the new volunteers to help them learn from the experiences that those volunteers have had as well. The next step we take a look at in the isoture model is recognition. And this is a way that we can acknowledge that the volunteers have done a great job, appreciate their contributions, and show them that we do value the work that they do. Now, each of us has a different method of how we like to be recognized, so we encourage you to think about a variety of types of recognition. Some of those could be ones that are more intrinsic, things such as how I feel after I've done the program, or having that good feeling when somebody comes up and tells you that they've succeeded in something that you might have helped them with. And there's also the extrinsic options as well, those types of things that are tangible that you can see, touch, and hold. Some of the examples that we provided to you on the next slide, you can see there on the screen a number of different things that range anywhere from very simple to a little bit more elaborate. All are very much appreciated by the volunteers, and I think sometimes we get astray away maybe from the handwritten note, but I know that when I receive those, I truly appreciate them, and I believe that others do as well, because you've taken the time to sit down, to write that note, to maybe place the phone call, to write out the email that you can send to the volunteer to express your appreciation for things that they have done on behalf of the program. Could be some news articles, newsletters, again with the social media that can be out here. Is very effective now. Once upon a time I did a volunteer survival kit that had a bunch of little items in it that we provided to the volunteers, help them to be, again, recognized for what they do. Sometimes certificates are enough. Anytime you can provide food, I think, is a positive thing for our volunteers, and there may be a more formal awards program that you'd want to consider also. Any of those types of things, as well as others, would be great ways that you can help to recognize your volunteers. The final step in the isoture model is going to be evaluation. As we take a look at evaluation, it's important that we are providing some feedback to the volunteers, ideally on an annual basis. It may not always be annual, but ideally that's what we should shoot for. Most of us as staff members are going to have our own performance reviews on an annual basis. Volunteers are in a similar role working with our program, so I think it's important that they too have some feedback on how they're doing with the program. The second part of evaluation that's really critical, I believe, is to receive program feedback from the volunteers based on their experiences. They're out there working with the members and the families directly. What went well for them this past year? What could be improved in the next year? And that program feedback that you receive as a staff member is going to be one that can be very helpful and very useful to you as you look to make program improvements in the future. A few of the basics that we talk about as we look at evaluation, we want to provide opportunities to share successes and identify areas for growth. And again, that can be individually with the volunteer level and also programmatically with the 4-H program. Another way that we can maintain open lines of communication, and I think as I talk with newer staff members around the state, that is one of the things that I try to impress upon them early and often. You'll hear that several times in this presentation today, keeping those communication lines open so that you have an opportunity to interact with the volunteers and helping them to better understand their expectations, understanding their responsibilities, how they can contact and connect with you. All those different types of things are very important so that you can address any issues that may come up at the beginning. You can help them to reaffirm what it is that they've committed to, and you can look at other opportunities. There may be opportunities that they haven't considered yet. Maybe they have done all they can do in the current role they're in the program, and they may need to look at a future program either within our 4-H program or beyond our 4-H program. They need to know it's okay that you might look elsewhere for a position to share their volunteer experiences and expertise. Jennifer, I'll give it back to you.
And now that we've talked a little bit about the isoture model, let's think about all of the resources that we know are out there that we could bring together so that we can share those resources with one another, so that we can, as a task force, gather those resources from our members to share with our members. Our task force would like to facilitate the building and the resource sharing from professionals in our field to build the skills around the area of volunteer management for the professionals in our association. Over time, some outstanding resources have been developed by many of us, and we're willing to share those resources. We believe that we can organize those based on the Isoture model, and that we can house those and share those on the NAE 4-H webpage. So, with contributions from our members across the nation, we can build a unique set of PowerPoints, taped, recorded presentations that have been done, as well as other resources that members can utilize to build their professional toolbox. So we are looking for members to help us build that toolbox by contributing items that they feel would be of great value. We have each contributed something from our toolbox that we'll be sharing with you in the next segment of the webinar so that you can get an idea of what we're looking for. And then we'll tell you how you can share items that you may know about. The first person to share today is going to be Pat.
So this is a training that was developed in Illinois it's based on the Isoture model, and the goal was to share best practices for successfully implementing the first two steps of the Isoture model and strengthening volunteer management. This was a series that we were doing, and so we had it broken down so that there were shorter sessions that staff could participate in. And so what I'm sharing today is actually just a portion of that information, but then again, these, as Jennifer mentioned, these will all be posted. So first I'll just, on the next slide, I'll just share, it kind of gives a little bit of an overview of what we were sharing in this session. Because it's based on Isoture, you're going to see some of the information mirrors some of the information that was shared earlier in the session. However, this was developed to emphasize different strategies for being successful in the first two steps, so in identification and screening. And in turn, since you have placed individuals identifying individuals who are a good fit with the volunteer role, it also will enhance volunteer retention. And at the time we were developing this, we were seeing that volunteer retention was a real issue between the first and second year that individuals were volunteering. So that's why we thought we really needed to focus in on these topics and why it relates to retention, because it was an issue for us at that time. So we started off in the next slide just showing, and introducing our staff to the entire module so that they knew what was going to be coming and what they would be learning more about as they went through each of the different sessions. But for the first session, it was just identification and selection. So the steps that we emphasized with our staff were really more things about, why do people volunteer for 4-H? We really felt it was important that staff get a good understanding of the why behind that so that they could be more effective and intentional in thinking about, how then understanding and connecting that why to what they needed to do and how they needed to market their volunteer opportunities. Things that we talked a lot about is thinking about local trends and local issues. They're not the same in all communities. So key to recruiting volunteers that are going to work well in a specific role, in a specific community, is knowing that community and what those needs are. We also spent time talking about making sure that the volunteers' roles are meaningful. When someone comes forward and they want to volunteer, they really have an interest in doing something that makes a difference. So make sure that the roles that you provide them have some substance to them. And also being intentional in volunteer placement. Volunteer placement is not a random process. We need to really make sure that we're thinking about who that volunteer is, what they bring with them, and how that fits best so that that skill set, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but how that fits in. And Also, one thing that we really emphasize, because again, this is something that we, in some of our surveys with volunteers that had not continued, we found is that sometimes they felt that once they decided they were going to volunteer, there was no quick action. So be prepared. You can't give them the recruitment pitch and then not have something for them to do. So you've got to have that volunteer follow-up plan ready, or else the volunteers, if they call the office and say, yes, I'm ready to volunteer and I want to support your 4-H program, if they don't get a call back, for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they may very well move on to something else. We also, one of the things we talked about, and I think is really important, is knowing what you're looking for before you make a generic ask. So knowing those communities, looking at your own demographics, design a recruitment message for the role that you want them to fill. In regards to why people volunteer, really think about what the volunteer will get from the experience. We can talk to them about our volunteer needs and how that will benefit the youth, but it's also good to think about how is this going to help you as a professional, but also just as a person. One of the things I think sometimes that we don't think about and don't share with them, that really volunteering, there's that fun aspect of it as well. I mean, they're going to be doing something depending on what type of role, if it's a skill set that they're bringing, that's teaching content or subject matter when working with young people, that allows them to have time to do this thing that is what they do in their leisure time or they like to do. So point out, the why they should do it and match that with the fun aspect as well. And then also match the volunteer skills with the volunteer role, because we want them to be successful. And so if we're recruiting someone to be a volunteer that supports growth in the electricity project area or the robotics project area, we're looking for someone who maybe either have a strong interest and want to learn those things, or they already have some skills and it's something that they like to do. So make those matches. In the next slide, one of the things that I'm sharing with you, and this is another resource that hopefully will be available and a part of what we can share at this site, is exploring some type of an interest survey, a volunteer interest survey, so that we match their skills with the roles that we have. This can be a paper tool, it can be an online tool that you develop, but this is just an example that we have used here, but it's a survey tool that comes from Volunteers for the Next Generation, which again is another important and useful training tool to have when working with volunteer management. So that's just one example. Considering local trends and local issues. This is something that we really spend a lot of time talking about, because it is something that's different in lots of different communities. But think about things such as family patterns. Think about when those volunteers are going to be available. Do we need to have a role if they have young children and have lots of after-school activities? Maybe it's a volunteer role that's not during the early evening hours after school when they're tied up with practice and getting kids to different places. So think about family patterns, and also think about the community patterns. Maybe your communities are changing. Maybe there's more of an aging population in your community. That could be a great resource. Those individuals who no longer have their own children at home, but maybe they would want to be involved as a volunteer. Maybe not, and maybe it would be more of an episodic volunteer role. But think about all those different issues when we're talking about what volunteer is going to be the best place in a particular spot. In the next slide, I also wanted to point out and share another tool. I mentioned earlier, it's important to have a volunteer recruitment plan. It's not enough that we create some really nice looking brochures and put them out there at the local library or in those prominent community places. We really need to have an effective plan that outlines this is what we're going to do, because it's that getting the message out, it's capturing their attention, it's looking at their skills and matching them up, and it's clearly identifying these are the roles that we have right now for volunteers in our program, and we'd like to make you a part of it. And again, this is a resource that comes from the Volunteers for the Next Generation. So think about that plan and how you're going to put it in place and be intentional about it, because you want this to be something that you're not just doing. We recruit year-round, but sometimes it's very effective to have a specific time where we're going to be really focusing in on volunteer recruitment. We launch our campaign, we put out the social media information, and make the entire community aware of it, which is also creating great awareness of what's happening in the 4-H program locally, and then have a timeline so that you're very organized and succinct, and you have a plan for following up with those new volunteers. And I just want to end this piece with this final slide, just reminding staff that your job isn't done once the volunteer says yes. Make sure you have a post-recruitment plan ready and share it with those individuals in the office that the new volunteer is likely to talk to when they are calling back to say, you know, I just have a few more questions. And I think it's really important that we can have other staff involved. The volunteer recruitment is not a one-person team, and I realize everyone in the office has different responsibilities. However, you want that person who is answering the phone to have enough information so that they can direct the volunteer to more information. They can have something there that they can send the volunteer. Again, you just don't want that volunteer left hanging, because then they walk away and say, well, maybe they really don't want me, or maybe they really don't need me. Volunteers are truly our most important resource when we're working with the 4-H program, so we need to use them wisely, because we don't want to be stuck on that hamster wheel of volunteer recruitment where we're constantly recruiting volunteers because we don't engage them quickly enough and provide them the support that they need to feel really good about what they're doing. So these are just some ideas on things to do, but you know, making sure that you listen to them, make sure that every time they come to the office they feel welcome, and also making sure that we have individual or small group appointments with them so that we touch base, and that not only helps them, but that also helps us as staff members, because when the volunteers come in and they share the information of what's going on, that brings new information about the community to us as well.
Thank you, Pat. Next up, we'll talk about orientating and training volunteers. This is an excerpt from the presentation that I did for our United Way, talking to extension staff as well as staff from various nonprofits, talking about orientating and training volunteers in order to achieve excellence in their service records. And we talked about the importance of orientation and training following their acceptance through our various screening processes. And that orientation is an opportunity to provide our volunteers with information about the organization and the volunteer program, and really making sure that the volunteers fit into the mission of the organization. Whereas training provides volunteers with specific knowledge, skills, and attitudes that they will need to effectively perform roles and duties. And I think that by thinking about it in those two ways, it can really help volunteer managers and administrators and staff in our organizations be able to effectively plan their orientation and training programs. And with orientations, if we really think about these three things, it can be very helpful as we think about orientating our volunteers to our different organizations, and specifically in extension. But why should I be here volunteering? And how will I be volunteering here, and where do I fit in socially as part of this organization? What is the difference that I'll be making, and what is my role going to be here? And in the big scheme of things, where is it that I really fit? Help them to understand where they fall in the hierarchy of your organization. If you can help volunteers understand this, volunteers can help to share what is the mission of 4-H. They can help spread the mission of Master Gardener, or whatever the organization is, but in our case here today, specifically 4-H. So that can be really essential. So that orientation is really critical to help them see how and why they matter and where they fit in our program. Why are they the essential piece? So that can be critical in helping us to retain them. And then in training volunteers, sometimes when we forget to train volunteers, or we do not do a good job in training volunteers, volunteers perform their duties poorly or step outside their boundaries. They may not always take all the proper safety precautions, or they report feeling lost while they're doing their task and they may not return. Or in the worst case scenario, they have a negative experience and they tell others about it, thus undermining the image of our organization. So if we follow these 4 steps when we train volunteers, we set ourselves up for success, and that's what we all want. So step 1, identify those training needs. What are they? What skills, attitudes, and knowledge do our volunteers need to be successful in the specific role that they will be fulfilling? So look back at that role description. Design the training so that it allows them to gain those knowledge and skills. Okay, so make it hands-on perhaps. Allow them to shadow someone. Deliver the training in an effective manner. And then assess and refine your training to make sure that it is meeting the needs, that it is allowing volunteers to gain the knowledge and skills that they need to be successful. If we continually follow these 4 steps as we train volunteers, we will be successful and avoid those pitfalls. So orientation and training are key to making sure that we retain and prepare volunteers for success in our organization.
Thank you, Jennifer. This presentation is an excerpt of what we did back in the first part of 2016, and I led this conversation along with our State Master Gardener Coordinator because they had identified this topic of navigating difficult volunteer situations as one that they thought they needed to address within their community of volunteers. And the application here is widespread. It's not just Master Gardeners, it's not just 4-H, it's really any kind of a volunteer situation. This is talking about the utilizing and a little bit about the evaluating components of the ISATUR model. As we take a look at the overview of the training that we'll provide here on the website, the overview slide shows that we talked about communication. We talked about ways that we can work together and continue that communication. I think I mentioned earlier that you might hear that communication topic come up again, and here it is one more time. We also talk about the expectations of our volunteers. What is it that we really want them to do? What happens when they don't perform to our expectations? How do we resolve some of those issues? And are there options that we might have to help with some discipline that may need to be enacted if in fact they don't do what we encourage them to do? And we finished out this program with some scenarios, and that was an opportunity for our participants during the webinar to have some feedback with us, to provide us with some suggestions of how they might handle some difficult situations, and we also were able to provide them with some suggestions along the way. I want to highlight a couple of other slides that we included in the actual webinar that day. One of those was on the resolving issues, and there's that communicate word again, really finding ways that we can help our staff learn to build positive relationships with all the volunteers that they work with, listening and understanding, not just talking. But then when you do have that conversation, really do have a conversation face-to-face. It's not something that we need to do via text, via email, or via letter. You need to have that conversation one-on-one. Looking at all sides of the issue is something I learned very, very early on in my extension career. There are always multiple sides to the story. The first side that you hear is likely not the accurate or the most accurate side. There may be other things going on that you need to consider as well. Keeping documentation is very important. Having written accounts of what's happened, if there are issues that have presented themselves to you, and not having those anonymous reports. If an individual feels like it's important enough to share with you, then that individual needs to be willing to put their name on it. And then while you do that, also maintain confidentiality. You're not going to go out and spread this rumor or this situation beyond the people with which it is actually affecting. There are a few myths about problem volunteers that we talked about. The first one I think fits with any type of a conflict situation. If I ignore the problem, it's going to go away. Well, I think we all know that's not true. We do need to address it. We need to take action. We need to talk with the individuals involved and to help it go away in a positive way. And the other one I'll mention here this afternoon is that no one else notices. And I think sometimes we think, this is a situation that it's just an isolated volunteer doing something maybe we don't want them to do, and nobody else is really noticing. And I think the longer you go, the more you realize that yes, in fact, the other volunteers are taking notice. Other participants in the program are taking notice, and they're seeing that someone may be getting away with something that probably they shouldn't be. And so again, we need to take action so that we can address the problem in a positive way. I'll share next with you one of the scenarios that we included in the webinar, and again, when you see the full program after it's posted, you'll be able to look at some other scenarios that we included. But this is one, and one unfortunately that we've had in Indiana, and I'm guessing other states have had as well, where social media is utilized to blast a challenge that the volunteers faced, and they just like to take to the social media airwaves, so to speak, and air out their dirty laundry and talk about all the nasty things that this person may or may not have done to them. Not an effective way at all to resolve a conflict and a difficult volunteer situation that we have to work through. And so one scenario that we provided, and we did talk about a number of different options about how to resolve some of these types of things. So you'll want to take a listen to the webinar recording that we'll have posted for you to learn a little bit more there. The last couple of slides that I will share would be just a summary of the key points that we made, and I think the first one is so critical in a number of situations in extension and elsewhere. Each of our situations that we deal with is unique. We are not able to provide a prescription solution that's going to work for every situation. It's just not reasonable. We're talking about human beings and unique situations, and we need to be able to think clearly and to be able to resolve those situations using a number of different skills and a number of different opportunities. Continue to communicate. Two-way communication starting the very first time that you meet the individual, way back in the identification and the selection steps that Pat talked about. Those are important times to start that communication with that new applicant. And as you start to develop that relationship very early on, it's going to pay incredible dividends the longer you go. Clarifying those expectations is the next one. As we move on to the next slide, we'll also see that you have opportunities to realize that volunteer management does take time. And it's something that it's a critical part of our program to have those volunteers, because they do really benefit the program. They're able to help our program grow as our volunteer base grows, and it's something that we really need to take our time and do a good job with. And the last point on the next slide that I will highlight here is that you want to evaluate yourself. How well did you handle that volunteer situation? It's kind of a self-evaluation, a self-reflection for you. What would you do differently the next time? There were probably some really good things that you did, and if you're like me, each time I finish a conversation that has a little bit of a difficult connotation, I always think of all the wonderful things I could have said about an hour after the conversation is over. So if you kind of think through that, write some things down about how you might handle things differently in the future, that will hopefully help you the next time you face another difficult situation. Jennifer, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Steve. So you've just seen 3 PowerPoints shared that will be posted as well. Another resource that is available to staff is the 6-week staff development course focused on working effectively with volunteers. And that course is called Achieving the Extension Mission Through Volunteers. And this is offered by the North Central Region Volunteer Specialists. This is the second year for this course to be offered, and we are opening that up to the nation today. It will be offered beginning January 17th and run through February 27th of 2017. The registration link is posted here. There's also a YouTube video. The link to that is also posted here that explains more about the course and talks about its design. It is synchronous as well as asynchronous learning. The cost is $250 a person. You will travel through this course with a cohort group. The space is limited, so you will want to register rather quickly. The course is limited to 160 participants, and you are placed in a cohort group of 40. So this is a valuable experience. If you have any questions about it, you can contact Pat, Steve, or myself for additional information. So that is an opportunity that is opened up as well to all of you. And Pat is going to tell you a little bit about Everyone Ready.
Okay, and I am happy to talk about, just real briefly, about the Everyone Ready resource, which is available for all of us to have access to. I'm hopeful that many of you are already aware of and have used the Everyone Ready materials. They actually are developed through Energize, which is a clearinghouse for resources. This is your chance to get valuable training from this a host of trainers and consultants at no cost. This is an online volunteer management training resource. There's actually a series of lessons that are posted on 4h.org, and you really should explore them if you've not had the chance to yet. If you have not looked at them recently, I would suggest that you use the link that we've included on the slide to check them out. I'm using these next two slides just to highlight all of the different categories that are covered and the topics included, each of those larger categories. All are related to volunteer management and provide you with tools to support your work. So the main categories include related to volunteer management are personal readiness, organizational readiness, and engagement of volunteers. And then the second set include education of volunteers, sustainability of volunteer efforts, and review and analysis of your volunteer delivery systems. I think this is just an excellent resource that is right there at your fingertips. If you're looking for information on how to better coach volunteers, just go to that sustainability of volunteer efforts. If you need some tools, it provides you with some great resources, some good tips, things to do. So I like how it's set up and that it has everything in the broad categories, but then it identifies, right where you need to go to find the tools that you need just to help you with perhaps a difficult situation. So I'd encourage you to check that out as well on 4h.org.
We are really excited to be able to share this next opportunity with all of you on the webinar today. This is a new venture that we're trying on a nationwide level that we're calling the 2017 National 4-H Volunteer Eform. Our overall theme for next year is 4-H Grows, utilizing the new marketing campaign, 4-H Grows Through Volunteers. We're going to be able to host our resources and our website information at the 4h.org website, and as we take a look at the next slide, we will see some of the topics that are going to be involved in the eForum. The eForum has been tried in several different regions over the last few years, and what we've tried to do with the national eForum is take the resources that we have throughout the country, take the lessons that have been learned over the last few years as we've offered eForums on a regional level, and combine that into a national eForum series where volunteers and staff can come together at their local host sites and take advantage of virtual presentations from experts around the country, as well as leading a number of hands-on activities with the volunteers and staff who attend the local host site sessions. So we're looking at an audience of any volunteer that works with the 4-H program. That would be adult volunteers and also youth volunteers. If we have some that are especially have some leadership roles within the 4-H program, we would encourage them to come, and also extension staff. Any of those individuals, the adult volunteers and extension staff, can serve as hosts, and so perhaps at a local community center, at a fairgrounds, at a county extension office, wherever that might be, they, with a internet connection, be able to host an Eform session and be able to join the conversation that's going to occur across the country. There are 3 of those sessions, as you see here on this slide. 3 different sessions are actually going to start in October of 2017, so we have just about a year before the first one starts. Each of these is going to be held on the first Thursday of the month, and so our October 5th session is going to be Cultivating an Environment for Growing True Leaders, and during that session we'll look at ways that we can really help our 4-H members to have an outstanding 4-H experience. Whether that be in a club setting, an after-school program, a camp, whatever that setting might be, we want to be sure that our young people have the best experience possible. The October 5th session is going to give some good suggestions and hands-on activities that will help 4-H volunteers and staff be able to apply that information. Our November 2nd session is called Stemming into Animal Science, Growing True Leaders, and this one we're really trying to focus on how we can utilize science in a number of different areas within the 4-H program, but really kind of focused at this session on the animal science areas. Sometimes we don't think about that as much as we might think about some of the other static project exhibits, but we're looking at ways that we can utilize science in animal science as well as other project areas. And then our final session of the series will be on December the 7th. It is Helping 4-Hers Grow in Life and Work, and it's really looking at workforce readiness, how we can help our young people be prepared for the workforce once they complete our 4-H program. They may or may not be moving on to continuing education after they graduate high school, but whether or not they do, they still have a workforce to look forward to, and we want to be able to help prepare them for that in the best way possible. So we have a year out pretty much before these happen. We really encourage all of our staff across the country to get this on their volunteer trainings calendars and to invite volunteers to come. Each of the sessions is going to be held from 7 until 8:30 p.m. and that's going to be Eastern Standard Time. So recognizing it's going to be earlier across the country for the other 3 time zones plus others that we may have. And again, we'll be hosted at local sites across the country for all of our 4-H volunteers, our team leaders and extension staff. And Jennifer, if we could go back one slide just for a moment, I want to highlight again that URL for the 4h.org site under Volunteer Professionals. That site is going to be up within the next couple of weeks, so you'll find more information including marketing materials and some other background information about the Eform, and we really encourage you to take a look at that and plan that as a part of your volunteer training for 2017. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Steve. All right. You have seen some great resources that are out there that are available to you and to other professionals in our organization. So we would encourage you to share about these resources and to take advantage of them to build your professional toolkit, and to feel free to share with others the resources that you have built so that you can continue to build the toolkits of others as well. So to submit resources to our task force, you can submit them to me, Jennifer Weichel, at weichel@msu.edu. It's up here on the screen. And just indicate in the subject line of your email, resources. If that resources keyword is in the subject line, that would be fabulous. If it says resources for task force, that's great as well. Please indicate in the body of your email which section of ISATURE you feel the resource best fits. Resources should focus on enhancing the skills of professionals who work with volunteers. That way, professionals can log on, to watch a recording perhaps during a lunch hour or at some time that is convenient for them, so they can log that into their professional development log. We all need those professional development resources and days in our portfolios. I will be gathering those and submitting those quarterly to be posted on the NAE 4HA website. And please remember that by us posting these up on the website, it does not mean that we are endorsing them. You should always check your state policies and procedures to ensure that you are in compliance with your state's policies and procedures, as those do vary from state to state, especially those for screening and selection and various policies. So always check to make sure what your state's policies and procedures are. But once again, let's support each other in the work that we do and help each other to build those personal toolkits. And on behalf of our task force, I would like to thank Pat and Steve and Abby for supporting our webinar today and their contributions to making it successful, and thank each of you for joining us today. So thank you and have a great day, and at this time we will entertain any questions that all of you may.
Thank you, Jennifer and team. Are there any questions for the presenters this afternoon? All right. Thanks to everyone for coming out this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you guys next month. Thank you.